just developing a better attitude while meditating. I think making it more of like a joyful experience. That kind of I
Exactly.
think is helping me. Yeah.
Hmm. So, um, part of the way that I teach also, I tend to sprinkle a little bit of the Pali language into the talks. Um, the first word that I would introduce to you is anapanasati. Anapanasati means in breathing, out breathing, and the word sati needs quite a lot of definition and quite a lot of understanding because sati is probably the number one skill to be developed. And what that means is what it's translated to, and you've already used the word, is mindfulness. But in general, in the English language, nobody uses the word mindfulness. Back in the 1950s, we had the expression of mind your P's and Q's in the sense that a child, when he's learning, will sometimes switch the P and the Q, make their R's or their K's backwards, that kind of thing. But other than that, mindfulness seems to be a word that was invented just so that they could give a translation to the word sati. But a better way of looking at sati is to see that it's remembrance, that the primary skill is to remember. And the question is, well, what are we going to remember? And I would say that in overall, the encompassing way of linking it is to remember the Dhamma. But a better way, from the fact that you've read a little bit of Richard Alpert, um, be here now, to remember to be here now, to remember to come back to this present moment. And so, um, by the way, this sati that is part of anapanasati is actually seen throughout the suttas. It's one of the most important words that is there. For instance, another sutta is named the Sati Patana Sutta. That sati is one of the seven factors of enlightenment. Sati is one of the four bases of power. It's just all over the place. All right. And that the most important place that we find it is that it's one of the eightfold noble path. That part of the path is sati. So let's look at what sati actually is. Sati is the ability to remember something. An example would be that you're going into the house to look for a book. It's possible for you to go in the house and start looking for that book and then get sidetracked because you see another book or somebody starts a conversation and whatever like that. And it's quite possible then for someone to leave the room without the book. Why? Because they didn't remember that their original intention was to go into the room to get a book, a particular book. And they came without it. How many times has that kind of thing happened to you in your life? A million?
Yeah.
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 And so, what we're talking about here is the ability to remember to do what we know needs to be done. Now, when I say no needs to be done, in that regard, that's actually the beginning of right noble view. And when we sit down for meditation, if you want to use that word, then we do so because we already have right view. The right view is that um, life, the way that I've been leading it, is not as good as it could be. And that if I practice this technique, then it will improve. Okay. That alone is the beginning or the budding of right view, that things can be better. And then we put it together and recognize they can be better if I remember that they can be better.
Mm.
Ah, because we know things can be better, and then we get wrapped up in the world. And so we have to remember that things can be better. The next item on the list, the third item, is right effort. That if we can remember that the mind can be better, then we need to also take the effort to actually do it. And so these three qualities of the Eightfold Path run and circle around each other, with right view coming first, right sati or right remembrance, and right effort. They run and circle around one another so that they become kind of a unit. And then we add a fourth ingredient, and the fourth ingredient is right attitude. So that when you add right attitude, we now have four path factors operating together. And the right attitude then is, let us say, part of the immediate goal, and also part of the skill set that we're going to need. So right away we start developing the skills of right view, right remembrance, right effort, and right attitude. So these are the four things we need. Let's see how that works in practice. When the student sits down, they sit down with the right view that I'm going to watch the breath. And then the mind wanders away from the breath. Now, when the mind wanders away from the breath, basically what it's doing is it's going back to its normal state, the normal state that it's been in and for many years. And we call it normal simply because it's predominantly the time that's the normality. More than 99% of our time we're spent with just letting the mind do what it wants to do. Very rarely do we have it really focused and directed. So what we're actually doing now is we're beginning to develop the skill of focusing and directing the mind with this sati and with right view. So the student sits down, he's got the idea that he's going to watch the breath, and then the mind wanders away. And it may wander away for 5 minutes, it may wander away for 10 minutes, but eventually sati will come. In other words, he'll remember, oh, I was here to watch the breath. This is a critical point in time, because this point in time is the time when you either can make a change or not. Normally, the way that most students operate is they don't make a real change or not using right effort. And so when they see that the mind has wandered away, and they have the right view that they should be watching the breath, then they have thoughts like, oh, this is hard. Oh, this is a monkey mind. In fact, that's a very famous phrase, monkey mind. That the mind has run away again. And we see that as kind of a negative, that the mind is out of control. Well, everybody should understand that the mind is just normally out of control. So if it's normally that way, then why feel bad about it when we catch it running away? The better thing to do is to understand that it's quite marvelous that we can actually now recognize or see, perhaps for the first time, that we've caught the mind wandering away. Because only by catching it wandering away can we bring it back to this present moment, back to the breath. By doing so, it requires, especially for the beginning student, effort. The question is it right effort or is it wrong effort? Wrong effort would be striving. Wrong effort would be forcing it. Right effort would be joyful in the sense of, aha, I caught you. I caught you wandering away. Never mind, come on back, okay? So we begin with a joyful attitude. Now, that's one of the things that I find quite curious about Western Buddhism, is that even though that the Buddha has pleasure, sukha, joy, happiness, and all kinds of things like that, which are basically just the same kind of mental state, as a goal, as a practice, as a skill to be developed. And yet, in meditation in the West, that's often left out. That key ingredient, that most important part. Now, Anapanasati operates within a framework. And that framework is actually the Satipatthana, or the four foundations of mindfulness. And it is merely a way or a method of breaking the human being down into some sort of constituent part so that we can begin to work with it. All right? We have the body, we have the feeling. We'll talk about feelings a lot. We have the mind, and we have the mind's objects. So, when this beginning student sits down and says, I'm going to watch the breath, and then the mind wanders away from the breath. But when he was watching the breath, he was actually watching the body. He was watching the body breathe. Now, when we're watching the breath, it's hard to watch last year's breath. Hard to watch next month's breath. The only breath that we can actually watch is this breath, the ones we're having right now, which means that by watching or by doing Anapanasati, we're kind of automatically bringing the mind back to the here now of what's happening now. But when the mind wanders away, it almost always wanders into the past or into the future or into some job that needs to be done, something that is unfinished, undone, needs attention, etc., like that. And so we can become worried, we can become remorseful, we can become regretful. All kinds of possibilities happen feeling-wise with us when we're letting the mind wander away. It goes back to the normal state, back to normal state of uncomfortableness, dissatisfaction. And so, because the mind is already in that kind of a state, when we recognize that the mind has wandered away, we actually have to change now the state that the mind is in. Rather than letting it be in that state and trying to watch the breath with the mind in, let us say, it may not have hindered contents in the morning, but it's in the hindered state. And so it's very likely for the mind to go back into hindrances, or perhaps the student is capable of recognizing that the mind has wandered away, but then it just continues to wander away. Poor me, this is hard, meditation is difficult, etc., like that, many different kinds of thoughts. But with right effort, we begin to practice differently. So by looking at the Satipatthana, these four things, basically when we're watching the breath, then the mind is focused on the body and focused a little bit on the here now. When the mind wanders away, then the mind's objects are kind of in control, but we don't know it. But when Sati occurs, when we remember that we're going to be watching the breath, and we see that we're not, now we've already started to look at the mind itself. Is the mind filled with hindrances, or is it free from hindrance? That's the first thing that we begin to understand about what the mind is. Later, as we investigate more, just as Ram Dass is talking about, as we begin to investigate more, we begin to see that the mind has various states. Sometimes it's really sharp, sometimes it's dull, sometimes it's focused, sometimes it's disfocused, sometimes it's hindered, sometimes it's free from hindrances. And as we study the mind, we can begin to recognize these various mind states so that we know what the condition of the mind is in. Also, when we see the hindrances, we recognize them then as mental objects. And so now, all of a sudden, just by recognizing that the mind has wandered away, three of the four of the Satipatthana has already occurred: body, mind, and mind objects. So, by the way, in the long list of things, step 9 of Anapanasati is the recognition that the mind state. In that way, we recognize that the mind is hindered. Step 10 then of Anapanasati is to gladden the mind. It's actually part of the process. If the students are practicing correctly, the correct practice is to gladden the mind. There's many different ways to do this, but my favorite is with the phrase, "Aha, I caught you," because we catch the hindered mind. Now, the mind that's hindered is the normal state of mind. That's the way that it normally is. So we don't fret that the mind is hindered. But what we're doing now is that the new thing that's happening is Sati. I see it. I remember to look at the mind to see that in fact it is hindered. And because we can see the hindrances, that's the skill that's being developed. Being able to see that the mind is hindered. And so by seeing the mind hindered, that's actually something good, wholesome, valuable, and correct. In fact, a lot of what we're going to be doing together is all based on seeing. In fact, to go a little bit inside of an overall viewpoint, as a student progresses, he will progress through what we call 10 fetters or 10 asava, 10 pimples, 10 outflows, 10 ropes that bind us down. These are the way of looking at it. And the first three of the fetters are freed or are released through knowledge alone. Mere seeing is enough to free us from the major part of the bondage. If we use the word enlightenment, we can see that the word enlightenment, the primary word in enlightenment, is the word light. And that the word light has two different uses. One is the sun comes up and the light of day, or we can turn on a light. And the quality of the turning on a light is the quality of being able to see. So the first stage of enlightenment is the ability to see. The second quality of the word light means that it's not heavy. It's not a bondage. It's not a burden. So the next 7 fetters is actually the setting down of the burdens that we're capable of seeing in the beginning. So the first 3 fetters are all about seeing, and the next 7 fetters is all about what we do see that we can do without. That basically everything about Buddhism is not giving you anything. We're not going to give you salvation. We're not going to give you a heaven. We're not going to give you a JC. We're not going to give you a hell. We're going to take all of that stuff away and a whole lot more. We're going to sort of empty things out. In a way, looking at the mind as like a kitchen, we're going to take out the trash.
Yeah.
The people in a real kitchen, they if they don't take out the trash after 3 or 4 days, they can't do any more cooking. They got too many onion peels all over the place. So in the kitchen, we have to take out the trash. Unfortunately, in human society, nobody ever bothers to tell their students, you got to take out some of the mental trash too.
Mm.
Well, what would we consider trash? Things that are, one, not useful, not valuable, not wholesome. For instance, lies that we've been told that we believe. We need to throw out all of those lies. So part of the investigation is to figure out what's true and what's not true, what's useful, valuable, and wholesome. This is the way that we need to see things, is what is it that's useful, valuable, and wholesome. However, when the mind is in hindrance, it can't see. So we're looking at kind of a two-stage process. One is to clean the mind out of the hindrances so that we can see what's going on, and then we can see the real garbage that needs to be taken out. Only the real garbage that needs to be taken out is, say, for instance, the broken stove, the stove that broke down, or the broken down refrigerator that's still in the kitchen that we never took out. The big stuff needs to be removed. But we couldn't see it because the old bad dead refrigerator was covered with onion peels, and we couldn't even see the onion peels to take them out. Once we take out the onion peels, now we can see the real stuff that needs to be done. So this is the way that we look at it, kind of a 1-2 step or a 1-2 punch of enlightenment. The first one is to see what needs to be done, and that means a lot of cleaning out so that you can see what needs to be done. And then the real work is to do the work that is seen that needs to be done. These first 3 patterns that I'm talking about, I'll give you them now so that we can start to deal with them right from the very beginning. The first one is personality view. Who am I? What am I? What was I in the past? What will I be in the future? All of this kind of stuff, associating with the self. This needs to be investigated because most of the people in the world have been lied to about who they are. One of the biggest lies that's been told is you are a soul.
Mm-hmm.
When people tell me that, I say, oh no, I've got 2 souls, and then I point to my feet. Little spelling error there, but never mind. So that's one of the big ones, is that if there was a soul, if you did have a soul, then that soul would be manipulatable. Basically what we're talking about is that the soul means that you're God's football. And he can kick you any way he wants to, into heaven or hell, and it's his choice. And that your job is to suck up to him, to get on his good side, so that he will kick you in the direction you want to go. All right? But when students begin to recognize there is no soul, that means that there is no big power that's going to be kicking me around for the rest of eternity.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, death is death. It's all over then. And the best thing that we can do is to prepare ourselves to have a really happy death. And yet very few Christians that I know of have a happy death. Most of the Christians, in fact, all of the Christians I know are closet atheists. And the time that they're most atheists is at a funeral. You probably heard there are no atheists in foxholes. There are no Christians at funerals.
That's the truth.
Why? Because no one, if they were really Christians, then they would be celebrating. Yay, Granny's in heaven. Let's take another drink and have a good wake. No. No, it doesn't happen that way. They're all still full of grief, suffering, misery. And so the Christianity doesn't work at that level. The people are afraid of death, and the older they get, the more afraid of death they become. So the old people go to church more than the young people because the old people are afraid to die.
Yeah.
But a Buddha is fearless, like a warrior. That's why warriors make good Buddhist monks, because they've already dealt with fearlessness. They're fearless enough to go into battle. They ought to be fearless enough to go into their own mind. And
Yeah.
so martial artists make really, really good monks. And that's especially true in Japan and here in Thailand, where many of they have a sport here. It's called Muay Thai. And it's a very brutal form of boxing.
Mm.
Uh, because the gloves that they use are like regular boxing gloves, but they don't ever hit anybody with the gloves the way they do in Western boxing. What they do with these big boxing gloves is they grab the shoulder of their opponent so that they can hit him in the face with their elbow.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah, it's brutal.
Not as
um,
many rules as boxing, huh?
well, they've got a lot of rules, but it's
Yeah.
ceremonialized.
Gotcha.
But yeah, in the ring after the fighting goes. And this is actually part of the reason why Thai massage is also known to be so brutal. Is because the Thai massage was there to get the tensions and the soreness out of the boxers. So the Thai massage, they'll go right in with wherever he got hit. They go right into that area with their own elbow. I've had Thai massage, and they do it. That's the on the in the Japanese method, the girls will actually walk on the back. Within Thailand,
Wow.
what they do is they'll take and put their both elbows in it and force all of their weight with their elbows right into those sore places. All
Wow.
right. So what I'm getting at though is that after these boxers retire, many of them become monks. It's almost like a tradition that the best thing for the time in that's one of the reasons why in certain areas of Thailand most of the monks are their bodies are covered with tattoos. They didn't get those tattoos when they were monks. They got those tattoos when they were boxers.
Mm-hmm.
But the point that we're making is here is the quality of fearlessness. And that this is one of the qualities that we work for within the practice of anapanasati is that it will take us eventually to a state of fearlessness. Um, Basically, what happens is that everyone is born in our society as little kids who are incapable of taking care of ourselves. We have to be fed, we have to be dressed, we have to be bathed, all of that kind of stuff as children, and we're dependent upon others. Little kids are oftentimes victimized by older kids, that parents will victimize their kids. For an example, if a child is having a tantrum, instead of giving the child what he needs while he's having a tantrum, which is love and affection and a bit of teasing and whatnot, the parent will get angry back. And so they both will have a tantrum. Mom has a tantrum because the kid's having a tantrum. And the kid now, instead of not getting what he wants and has a tantrum, now he's adding fear because mom's about to become brutal. And so we as humans in the Western society, we do not grow up like kings or like princes. In fact, even princes often are abused. And so we wind up being a victim or remaining a child throughout our whole life. The other quality is that there's a part of the brain that we call the reptilian brain. It's the anterior cortex, and it has things like the hippocampus, the cerebellum, the amygdala, uh, the medulla, the oblongata, and the brainstem, and all of that stuff is called the reptilian brain. Scientists have called that the reptilian brain because it's very, very similar to the brain of, say, an alligator, a reptile. So reptiles have all of the functions of their bodies. So that means that all of the functions of the human body is also controlled out of this area of the brain. That crocodiles can see with their eyes, they can hear with their ears, they can open their mouth, they can chew food, they can swim around, they can walk up on the land, and all of that kind of stuff. And so all of that kind of stuff that humans do, they do it from that part of the brain. old DNA, old um, instinctual behavior. But
Hmm.
human beings are capable of human behavior. This is the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that humans have that no other animal has. But just because humans have it doesn't mean anything, because most humans still operate as animals in the sense that they operate out of instinct. They operate according to the way that they've always been doing it, and they've always been doing it since childhood, which means that it was always instinctual behavior, not uh, wise behavior that's capable of a human being. So one of the ways of looking at it is that to become a Buddha means to come out of the animal, out of the instinctual way of living, and come to live a way of wisdom. Another way of looking at it is that most people, as they grow up to be adults, they um, still intellectually remain children. So the process of a Buddha is to become fully human, to fully grow up, to fully be an adult, as opposed to allowing the mind to continue to stay undeveloped and operating at an instinctual level. Now, this
Hmm.
is actually going to be hard work. Let's use the example of an autopilot on a commercial aircraft. The autopilot will keep the plane in the air. It'll keep the right amount of power. It'll keep the heading. It'll keep the altitude. It'll keep the angle. It'll do everything that the plane needs to do, and so the pilot can take a rest. However, the automatic pilot does not have any eyes. It cannot see. And so the automatic pilot will run that airplane into a flock of birds, unless they're very high, and then there's no birds really high, but it can run into other airplanes. It can run into mountains. It can run into turbulence. It can run into storms. It can run into all kinds of things that's not programmed into the autopilot. So if any turbulence comes, the pilot needs to come before the plane heads into the turbulence so he can maneuver around it. Now, this word turbulence is a really good example of what we mean by suffering or dukkha. Can we fly our lives such that we don't run into turbulence? The answer is you have to watch where you're going. However, when the pilot comes to take over the airplane and take control away from the automatic pilot, now the pilot has to do everything. He's got to keep the right power. He's got to keep the right attitude. He's got to keep the right altitude. He's got to keep the right heading and also manipulate things. And so it's work to do. And in that regard, meditation winds up being work. This is why right effort is one of the Eightfold Noble Path. We have to put in the effort that it takes. Because if we don't put in the effort, then we're going to revert back to the old programming, the instinctual programming, the very programming that's been causing us suffering our whole lives, because that instinctual programming was designed for humans living a lifestyle, say 100, 200,000 years ago. In fact, they say that humans have had fire for 600,000 years. That's how long we have had fire. They've kind of chased it down with their fossils and that kind of stuff to say that humans have had fire for 600,000 years. So during that 600,000 years, a lot of changes has happened, but only recently, in the past 2, 3, maybe 5,000 years, have major big changes happened. Like, for instance, growing our own food, which means to become sedentary at that food that we're growing long enough to take it as harvest. Before that, we were nomads, living in a world of danger. And so the self preservation instinct of the humans had to be on guard for danger because there was wild animals everywhere. In our societies now, though, the society is relatively safe. Relatively safe. No reason to have a lot of fear. And yet people are afraid constantly because we're in the habit of fear, and that habit of fear was generated out of the instinctual way that we used to live when everything was really dangerous. Here's an example of that. Imagine that there are two guys walking down an ancient animal path. They are sufficiently advanced in time that these humans actually have spears. And so one's got a spear and the other one's got a spear, and they're walking down the path in the hunt. And behind them they hear a rustle in the leaves. One of those guys immediately takes off running in fear. The other one, out of curiosity, turns around to see what it was. Guess who got eaten? The curiosity.
Yeah.
The guy who turned around out of curiosity. For that reason, curiosity is a gene that was not well promoted, but the fear gene survived. Our fear gene survived big time because the fear gene kept us alive, kept us humans, kept us procreating, etc., right into modern times, to where humans with our society has more or less solved the problem so that there's really no need for fear. And yet almost all wars are started between humans because those two humans were afraid of each other, operating on instinct. If they would look to see carefully, they could recognize those humans are not dangerous, but we don't. We operate off of instinct. And so we as humans have a past that keep us afraid when there's nothing to fear. And you can see how that old bad habit of fear then for the elderly Christian becomes really, really big. That in fact Christianity is not big enough or sufficient enough for them to overcome their fear of death. Even though that was the promise of Christianity in the first place. That's how Paul got it started. It was a very, very delicious thing to say, oh, you guys can live forever. We'll give you eternal life. All you have to do is perform our little ritual, do our little doobie-doobie, gobby-gobby, please, Jesus, save my butt. And if they do it right, they have to do it this way. They have to take a bath in cold, dirty water with their clothes on and then vote for Donald Trump, and thou shalt be saved.
That's my grandma to a T.
Yes, it's a funny joke when we can see the joke in it, but Granny cannot see that joke. She would be greatly offended if she heard what I just said.
Right.
So a lot of what we're having to do with is to deal with these fears and other feelings. Now, one of the qualities of the feeling of fear has to do with the feeling of doubt. And doubt is one of the hindrances. Doubt means we're unsure, we don't know what to do. And you can see how doubt or unsurety has the possibility of becoming curiosity. And curiosity has the quality of possibly becoming an investigation. Now we're getting closer to the way that the Buddha wants us to use doubt, is by using it as an investigation tool. Become curious. Why is it like that? Let's look into this. Let's take a big, close look, deep look at what's going on. But no, normally the mind is not going to be using doubt that way. It's going to turn doubt into fear. Well, what if? I'd better go do something about that, you see. So that's what happens with people, is that it's because of our feelings basically are out of control, which means we have our feelings operate on automatic pilot. And because of that, feelings are almost always incorrect because they have no wisdom to them. We're not looking at what's really going on. Instead, we're operating out of a program that's hundreds of thousands of years old that doesn't fit the modern society we live in at all. So part of growing up then is being here now rather than living our lives as if things were like they were 100,000 years ago, where everything is dangerous, everything is fearful, etc. So Ram Dass is really spot on when he talks about it, be here now. Eckhart Tolle, have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I've watched some of his stuff. I haven't read. What his book is titled something like that. Be here now, but the power of now. That's his book.
The power of now, this present moment. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't want to talk too much about Eckhart Tolle or any of the others, but I will mention this, that he came to his understanding naturally. He could see his own suffering, and he demanded that he get out of it. And he was able to do that. But when it comes time then to tell people what happened, he doesn't have really a clue. And for that reason, mostly what Eckhart Tolle says is because of what he read of Buddhism. So he's regurgitating the teachings of the Buddha and mapping that onto a set of experiences and a process that he went through.
That he doesn't really completely understand, or that he doesn't know. He can communicate to tell people that they should be present, but he doesn't tell them how to get there.
Right, but the Buddha does.
Yeah,
that's the magic of the teaching of the Buddha.
That's
that
kind of
Buddha,
like all other organized religions too, like Christianity. You can, I have a feeling that Jesus had this experience. He just didn't communicate it as well as the Buddha did.
That's exactly correct. You can look at also Socrates. Socrates had some things going. Euphrates, I forget how to pronounce his name. Starts with the letter E. Other Greeks in ancient time, and throughout history, we also have those like Saint Francis of Assisi and other Christian mystics who have found ways of being present, to be in the present moment, and that in fact nowadays we refer to Siddhartha Gautama of the Sakyan, we refer to him as the Buddha, but he did not refer to himself as the Buddha. And we refer to his teachings as the Buddha Dhamma or the Buddhist religion. But he referred to himself as Tathagata, actually Tathagata. Tathagata is actually like the nominative of Tathata, and Tathata is that word in the Pali of be here now. To be in the present moment. So it was so important for the Buddha that that's what he named himself, the one who is here now. This is often in English referred to as thus gone one, because they're using a stilted and uneducated way of translating it. The word thus is actually what we're talking about in the sense of this. When we say this present moment, we're actually saying this here. This is it. This one, or thus. And so the one who has gone to the thisness, or the one who has gone to thus, except that it's much more for us who are already there, we say is the one who comes to the here now. One come thus rather than one gone thus. So this is what much of what the practice is all about, is coming to the here now, and that this is what needs to be practiced over and over and over again to come to the present moment. And that we use the breath as an anchor for this. Anapanasati is an anchor to be in the present moment. And so we use the Four Noble Truths in the sense of we know that it's better to be in the present moment as opposed to be lost in thought. That's right view. The second one is to remember to come back to the present moment. The third one is to take the effort that it takes to throw out of the mind what was in the mind so that we can bring the mind to this present moment in the sense of instead of thinking things about only the past, now we're thinking about what's happening right now. So I'm beginning to watch the body. I'm watching it breathe as it goes up, as it goes down. And we also develop the right attitude of, hey, this is actually fun to watch. Aha, I caught you. We start to develop joy. We start to gladden the mind. We start to become successful. Because in fact, most of our lives are a failure. What do I mean by that? I mean it's a failure not in a really royal kind of sense, but kind of in a small, dissatisfying way. That even if you win a pool game, you can only feel happy about winning that pool game for a moment because the intention and anxiety of the next pool game, the anticipation, the all of that. So the winning of a game, we feel good for a short time, but we can't have that good feeling for a long time because it is, let us say, dependent upon an action that we took. If we're wanting to feel good all the time, what we need to do is develop that as a skill. That I present to you that happiness is a skill to be developed. Joy is a skill to be developed. Along with that, then many of the things that we in our society, they say, oh, we'll buy our car and you'll be happy. Or don't buy that little house that would be adequate for you. Buy the big house and then you'll be happy. Right? This is the way that the society works, is trying to make us happy by exploiting us, lying to us, saying that they're going to make us happy when in fact they don't. Hang on a second. I got a friend here and we need to do some logistics.
Sure.
You're going to take the 11 o'clock boat? Yes. So we can leave here probably at 10:30 or so. We can leave here and get to the boat in time. Do you have the ticket already? No. Okay. You see, the ferry is such that the ferry always fills up with automobiles and trucks, and it never fills up for human traffic. So there's no possibility to miss the boat because it's full.
Yes, I know. I've been with ferry already. I know. It is very slow. It is okay for me.
Okay.
Very cheap.
So let me finish this call, and then I'll take you to the boat. I'll keep track of our time here because it's 9:51 now, and I think that by 10:30 we can finish. But I'll try to finish the call before then. Okay. All right. Good. Sorry about that.
No, that's great.
So anyway, back to the Anapanasati. One of the points that I would like to mention to you is that because Anapanasati is based upon the four foundations of mindfulness, that means that each aspect of the four foundations of mindfulness has its own aspects of Anapanasati, and that each of the four foundations of mindfulness have four aspects of Anapanasati. So there's four for body, four for feelings, four for mind, and four for mind objects. Getting a little bit complicated, but basically what I wanted to point out is that we can't just practice mindfulness of breathing without practicing other aspects of Anapanasati, as I've showed you, by understanding or noting that the mind has wandered away. we're already dealing with the mind. We're dealing with the mind hindrances. By gladdening the mind, we also start to bring joy or pleasure to the body. And in that regard, we're also dealing with feelings. Now, to watch the breath is fairly easy. We watch the breath as an in breath. We watch the breath as an out breath. We watch the breath as a long breath. And when I mean long, I mean that the body moves a lot. And then we have the short breath, which means the body doesn't move very much. A lot of people think long and short breath has to do with time. But in fact, a short breath can wind up being so slow, take so long that you're only taking 2.5 breaths a minute. 15 seconds for an in breath, 15 seconds for an out breath, 15 seconds for an in breath, 15 seconds for an out breath. That's a very, very long, slow breathing, but it is also considered a short breath, simply because the body is not moving much. With the long breath, we want to take a really deep breath in the sense of the abdomen arises, the chest arises, even up to the point that the shoulders begin to rise, and you can feel all of the parts of the body that are doing that.
Breathing through your diaphragm, kind of.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
whenever the mind wanders away from the breath, you want to start off with a long, long breath to really pin the mind to the breathing. Take a long, slow, deep, happy, joyful breath. And as you're breathing out, do it with relaxation. Begin to feel good with those long, deep breaths. And after 4, 5, 6 of them, uh, up to you, then you let the breath go back to normal so that you begin to watch the short breath long on the in breath and short breath on the out breath. Now, these two things, watching the long breath in and out, watching the short breath in and out, the verb is the verb of understanding. In other words, all we have to do is watch it, and we can see it. And by seeing it, we begin to understand it. That's different from all of the other of the 14 steps of Anapanasati, to where their verb is train. To train the mind to investigate the body is step 3. Also, gladdening the mind is a training. Everything winds up being a training now. So we have to understand that a lot of this is skill development. We have to train the mind to see the body. Have to train it so that we can see the body in great detail. We begin to also train the mind with gladdening the mind so that we can begin to train the feelings. We train the feelings indirectly through the mind. We also begin to watch what the contents of the mind are so that we become skilled at what thoughts we're going to actually allow the mind to have. So this is also a training. Everything winds up being a training, just like music. And so when that student finally learns to play that one piece of music and he plays it correctly, he thinks that that's an event. But it's not. It's a process because of all of that training that he had to go through in order to learn that piece of music. So this is Anapanasati is mostly training.
Hmm.
And so the 4 trainings that we're using here, the primary one is the training of Sati, to remember, to remember, to remember, to keep coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back. That's the training. The second one is the right effort, to train the effort, and that in the beginning, effort might be a lot of effort. But as you train, it becomes effortless. It almost becomes energetic. So that when the mind was caught in hindrance, it would take, three, 4, sometimes 5 seconds to bring it out of those hindrances. But as you progress, it becomes instant. So that as soon as you recognize that the mind is wandering, well, you're automatically taking a deep breath. The effort becomes effortless. It becomes actually energetic. But this only happens when mindfulness becomes unremitting. In other words, though the mind will wander away, mindfulness will come back. Sati will return. And when Sati is unremitting, then the effort that it takes to bring the mind out of hindrances into the present moment becomes less and less effort and more joyful. So you begin to enjoy being in the present moment, free from the hindrances. We begin to understand actually the hindered mind is the suffering. And when the mind is not hindered, when we're in fully human adult mode, then there's no suffering because we're wise to it. It's only when we're operating instinctually or operating out of our childhood ways that we create and cause suffering for ourselves. Now, this is actually the antithesis of Christianity. Because what we're actually doing here, especially in the note of the second noble truth, when the student comes to understand it, it is actually the realization of the Margaritaville song. Do you know that Margaritaville song?
Yeah.
I'm sure you do. What's the last line of it? The last line of the song, and they use this over and over again. Hell is my own damn fault.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Some people say there's a woman to blame, but I know it's my own damn fault. Right? That's the second noble truth right there. That song is the second noble truth. It's my own damn fault. All right? That means that all suffering is manufactured within one's own mind. Tsunamis do not cause suffering. And yet tsunamis and those kinds of events like hurricanes and things like that, they say that these are God doing these things. But if you look at it from the Buddhist point of view, weather is just weather. If I don't like the weather, that's my fault. If that tsunami comes and I get swept away, it's my job to enjoy getting swept away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the way that we begin to look at it is that the outside world does not create suffering. That is created in the inside of the mind. And that it's done because we are not watching what's going on. So the more we are present, the more in the here now that we have, then the easier life is going to be. In fact, it's dead easy when we're here now. But when we start thinking about the future, then that causes problems. That causes the suffering. And so to go over the key points with you, the key points are that everything about Anapanasati is a training. That from the beginning of the practice, we're already practicing the Eightfold Noble Path, and we're already beginning to experience the Four Noble Truths, especially the second Noble Truth, that everything is my own fault, that the suffering in the mind is self-created. And because of that, I can take the effort that it needs to come out of that suffering so that I can have a life that's free from suffering more and more often and for longer and longer periods of time. But that's not a goal. That's just the process. That in fact, if you have a goal for your meditation, then that's like wanting something, the goal, that you don't have right now. That is Buddha's definition of suffering, wanting things you don't have, or having to put up with things that you do not want to put up with, or the confusion about what it is, all right? But mostly wanting things that we don't have, and this is one of the major problems with beginning meditators, is that they want something out of their meditation. And so they sit there in suffering, doing exactly the wrong thing because they want something that they don't have. What we need to do is to always bring it back to this present moment. My happiness is the happiness that I can manufacture right this very minute. And if I can manufacture it now, that's a skill to be developed. Let's not worry about the future. It'll take care of itself. If I have the skill of Sati now, then that skill will more than likely be there in the future. But if I don't have that skill of Sati now, how can I possibly hope for having future happiness? So everything brings it back to right here, right now, and it brings it back to the quality of training. And it also has the quality to do with what's going on inside the body. That's the major difference between the Buddha and the way that he was trained when he was when he was a bodhisattva. All of the religions train that if you do this, then someday in the future or somehow in the future, you will get some reward. And that it's also always outside oriented. For instance, the meditations that they had would be water meditation or fire meditation. They still have many thousands of temples in India that's dedicated to fire worship. Also, they had kasina meditations, which was like a mud disc or leaves that would be woven together. And so they would start green, but then they would yellow and get brown. And as the meditator watched it, the idea was is to look at this kasina and memorize it so that when I close my eyes, I can still create a mental image of it that's as good as the actual real object. That was the way they were training. All right. But the Buddha says, oh no, we're not going to be using the traditional methods of meditation. We're going to change all of that and bring it all on the inside. Instead of watching a mud disc, I'm going to watch this mud disc. Instead of watching that outside fire, I'm going to watch this fire.
Right.
Instead of looking at those clouds in the air, I'm going to look at these clouds in the air, the clouds of the mind as they float by. So that's the main change, is from the outside to the inside. That everything is a training, including the training of joy, and everything is done for the here now. Keeping those things straight will really start to improve your meditation. That every time you recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath, gladden the mind. Aha, I caught you. Keep practicing that over and over and over again as a skill to be developed so that every time you remember it, you're happy. But be careful because the normal idea is that, oh, now that I'm mindful, now that Sati has arisen, I feel bad because it hadn't arisen for the past 30 minutes. That's not the right way to practice. Don't deal in the past. As soon as you recognize Sati right now, let's do our practice right now. Let's take that deep breath and be really happy right now. To not dwell in the past.
Is guilt one of the hindrances? Is that, I mean,
Absolutely. Except that the word that's used is the word remorse.
Right. Okay.
But you can see that that is guilt. Exactly.
Right.
Guilt. And you have a number of sources of guilt from the outside world there in Arkansas that you have internalized. And so whenever you feel guilty, recognize that and label it as guilt. And then you can say, aha, I call you guilt. Out. Get out, guilt. Out. Out. I'm going to take a deep breath and be here now and be happy. Why? Because your guilt is always associated with something that's already finished.
Memory.
It's in the past. It's in the past.
Doesn't
so
exist.
Yes, guilt is actually part of restlessness, which we will talk about as one of the, not only is it a mental hindrance, it winds up being one of the fetters itself. One of the really deep fetters is the fetter of needing to do something, feeling that things are undone. and it expresses it itself in the form of anxiety. But how we deal with it in the beginning is by getting it out of the surface part of the mind, to get it out as a hindrance, to don't give that deep anxiety a format. Imagine it like this: a television show, and everything about producing that television show with all the actors, the cameras, the sets, and all of that kind of stuff. But one thing that does not happen is that that television show never makes it on the air. It doesn't get airtime. The likelihood of that television show that never gets airtime, its life cycle is going to be short. It's probably going to die. They're not going to make many of those of the series of that show if it never gets aired. The same thing is true about your guilt. The guilt that's deep inside, if it doesn't get aired, if it doesn't get any mental time, then it's going to start to die away.
Okay.
That's how things happen, is we don't give them any effort or any energy the way that we used to. As soon as we catch that stuff, we say, out, get out. We do not entertain thoughts of fear of death. We do not entertain thoughts of guilt. We do not entertain thoughts of, I'm going to get him back for that. An example of that would be having an argument with your girlfriend and then sitting down in meditation thinking that, oh, if I can sit here in meditation, I'll get over my girlfriend's argument. But then while we're sitting in meditation, we sit there and we think about that argument that we had with the girlfriend and thinking that, oh, well, maybe I should have said this and maybe I should have said that. And I'll fix her. I'll set this little trap up so if I say this and she says that, then I can say, aha, I got you, and things like this. And so now we've wasted our meditation time. We get up and we go back to have that second argument with the girlfriend, and you say this and she says something else. And now we're back to square one again, and she's won the argument. All right. But if we had not spent any time with that, thinking about that argument, but instead practiced correctly, then when we come out of the meditation, we're not going to go back to have the argument with the girlfriend. We're going to go back to be very sweet with her, to spread the joy that we've just manufactured in our sitting meditation. So that means we need to work really closely to stay out of the past, to recognize to stay out of the past, because the past gives us new work to do in the future. If we can stay out of the past, that automatically destroys the future. And so the more you practice, the deeper the skill comes, so that you begin to have the right attitude. And that right attitude then takes us out of the attitude of being dependent, being a victim of our own mind, into being a champion, into being a lion, into being a winner, into being okay, as opposed to not okay. Even the Buddha called himself a lion, and this is what he's referring to: a winner, a champion, one who is capable of throwing out all the suffering of the mind. And so a lot of what a Buddhist does when he's practicing correctly is to come out of suffering, because he's coming out of being dependent upon society, of being dependent upon others, of being needy, of being afraid, so that he becomes self-sufficient, becomes his happiness is no longer dependent upon relationships or objects of ownership. His happiness is manufactured directly.
Right.
And so you can start manufacturing that directly. You can even go so far as to, every time the mind wanders away, and you catch it wandering away, then you joyfully bring it back. You can actually add just a chuckle in the sense, ha ha ha, I caught you. Exactly. That's it. That's what you need to do every time you recognize the mind is wandering away.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
All right.
Well, that's helpful. That's helpful for me because yeah,
I'm giving
yeah.
sign language. Tam
It's
was
okay.
about to take him, and I said, no, I'll take him because we're about finished now. So
Sure.
let me ask you, do you
Yeah.
have anything else left? Any questions for what we've been talking about?
Um, as far as my practice goes, I try to make time in the morning. The time thing is my problem, finding time. I'm married. I have a child, you know.
It would be better then for you in that regard to take it, if you say you're going to practice an hour, then do it 10 minutes 6 times a day.
Okay.
All right, break it up
Okay.
into small pieces. We need to be able to do this all the time anyway. People
Right.
who sit for a long, long time in practice of meditation may not be getting the best benefit out of it.
Okay. That's good advice, breaking it up because I'm trying to keep it going throughout the day anyway.
Yes, exactly.
Trying to
So,
stay in
you, so
trying to
take 10
stay there.
minutes out at lunchtime. Take 10 minutes out sitting in your car before you crank it up after you get off of work. Just sit there in the car for 5, 10 minutes
Okay.
and then drive home. You'll probably drive home safer. So you can think of it
Uh,
like that. Take it and break it up into small things because we're going to work in that also.
okay. Okay.
All right.
That's helpful. This has
Excellent.
been
So,
really, really helpful.
all right. So the last thing that we should do is to make a kind of a schedule. The way that it looks like that is working is that it's best for, uh, let us say, most of the time, the long haul will be about once a week. To
Okay.
call about once a week. But if you need me or have a question or something, you can call anytime. In the beginning, also, if you feel comfortable at getting what I've just told you after 2 or 3 days, then it's okay to call men too.
Okay. Okay.
All right. And then later, after we're really, really good friends and you really understand the Dhamma, then you probably won't be calling so often, just like once a month or so to check in, maybe once every 2 weeks. So that's the way that it'll happen. But we need to establish a relationship over a series of months so that we can really go deep into this practice that,
Okay.
that we've just started talking about. Okay, Eric?
That sounds awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. You're you're great. This is such a nice thing. Any way I can support your efforts or anything, just tell me.
Let's talk about that later, okay?
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
Excellent. All righty.
All right. All right.
We'll see you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Have a good day.